These aren't the stories your mother told you. No, these are the other stories.
Today's episode of The Other Stories is The Cutoff, written by Jasmine Arch and narrated by Justin Fife.
You hear about Luke? Dale asked, picking at the label on a sweating bottle of Miller Lite. Trevor stared at his empty glass. He'd heard about Luke, all right. In Lennox County, a man didn't burn to death alone in his hunting cabin the night before Halloween without you hearing about it, especially when you'd worked together for 5 years. He caught Glenna's eye and held up 2 fingers. Their bartender, dolled up as Harley Quinn in a red and black bustier and colorful pigtails, nodded and hoisted the bottle of Johnny Walker over 2 fresh glasses. When Glenna brought the drinks, Trevor slid one over to Dale and raised his own glass. To Luke. To Luke, the younger man echoed, mirroring Trevor as they drank. Dale rubbed his Saturday stubble with the cuff of his leather jacket. I was at Walmart today and I saw Fletcher from the coroner's, he told Trevor. He was there last night at Luke's cabin. You know what he told me? What? He said they found Luke's body. Dale lowered his voice briefly as Glenna walked by. And his leg was missing. Trevor looked at him. His leg was just gone, Dale repeated. So what? Don't you think that's strange? A fire can't take your leg off. Something must have fallen on him, a beam or something, said Trevor. Fletcher said there wasn't nothing near him. Trevor could see the whites of the young man's eyes. His left leg, Trevor. What's your point? Remember last winter? Dale's fingers shredded a paper napkin. That fat lady. Glenna, chatting with 2 women near the end of the bar, glanced in their direction. Don't talk business in here, Trevor grunted, taking another swig. And that's all that was. Business. We shouldn't have done it, Trevor. We didn't have much choice, said Trevor. Why are you thinking about that? Don't it seem like too big of a coincidence? Trevor set down his empty glass. You want to know what I think? What? I think you've been watching too many slasher movies, man. Trevor looked down the bar. Hey, Glenna, who are your friends? He hollered. Come meet my buddy Dale. He likes movies. Dale was a nice kid, Trevor thought, but he talked too damn much. Maybe if Trevor got him laid, he'd finally shut up. As Dale trotted outside, he grinned at his phone where he'd just added Holly's number. Not too bad for a Saturday night. He got into his pickup, heaved the door shut, and assessed how drunk he was, cracking his knuckles and blinking at the moonlit parking lot. Good enough to make it the 4 miles home, he reckoned. Heading through Smuggler's Woods, Dale switched on his high beams, and that's when he saw it. It was in the road, hunched over, blocking the lane. An animal? It was too pale to be one of the local black bears, maybe an albino? Dale eased his foot off the gas pedal, squinting. When he got close enough to see, his heart dropped like a stone. She was as big as he remembered, and she was naked except for a few charred rags. Her skin looked mottled with spidery blotches like old burn scars. She crouched on her hands and one knee. A jagged crimson patch marked the spot where her other leg would have been. With inhuman speed, her head snapped up and looked straight at Dale. He gasped. I heard what you said about me, Dale. She was 50 feet away, but her voice rang in Dale's ears like she was seated next to him. As the truck barreled closer, she stood, balancing on her leg, bone-white teeth bared in a snarl. Panic, Dale swerved. Her mutilated face leered into his, and then his truck was airborne, ricocheting off trees as it plunged down a rocky hill. The cold air hit Trevor like a wall as he left the bar. He sucked it into his lungs. He needed to sober up. Better not take the highway home, he thought. More cops out that way. Trevor started the engine and pulled out of the lot. His headlights sliced the country darkness, glancing off boulders as he rounded a bend. The upside-down pickup blazed with flame at the bottom of the hill. "Holy shit," said Trevor, hitting the brakes and pulling the car over. Wide awake now, Trevor edged down the slope toward the inferno, arms flung out for balance, sneakers sliding on loose dirt. Squinting against the brightness, Trevor felt the heat coming off the Ford truck. License plate DALE 99. Behind Trevor, shadows danced against the hillside like jubilant demons. On the ground, pulverized window glass glittered in the firelight. Beyond the truck lay a man's body, leather jacket shredded. His right leg was bent at a nauseating angle, and Trevor couldn't see his left leg anywhere at all. In the middle of Lynx Lake, Trevor dipped an oar through the water. The lake was quiet but for the calling of birds and the slooping of fish. He baited his hook and cast the line. Dale's words at the bar came back to Trevor. He hadn't thought about that big woman for a while. Trevor had tried to forget that day at work, and other days. Working at the crematorium wasn't exactly a party, but it paid better than the factory, and Mr. Judson would hire you with just a GED. It had been a January afternoon, the land bleak and dead, the sky a sullen gray. Winter was usually their busy season, but business was slow that week. When the corpse arrived, Dale had read her name off the paperwork. "Adrienne Donovan," he said. "Welcome to the hellhole." He'd laughed his high-pitched laugh, and then they'd opened the casket. Luke had glanced from the body to the gumdrop-shaped opening of the old stone crematory oven. "Boys," he said, fingering his long gray beard, "she ain't gonna fit." "Look at that heifer," said Dale, cackling. "Stand back, gonna be one hell of a grease fire." They had poked her belly, watched it jiggle. Trevor had gone off to call Mr. Judson, who was offside doing God knows what. He'd come back, holding a bone saw. "Judson said, take care of business," he'd told the others. "Won't matter if she's in pieces when she goes in. They all come out the same." "Well then," Luke said, "get to cutting. I could use a country ham for my smokehouse." He hooted with laughter. Trevor smiled and handed the saw to Dale. "Seriously, man?" their youngest recruit had said. "You can handle it, kid," said Trevor. "Build those muscles up." "But where should I cut her?" "It's them big old hips that won't fit," said Luke. "Take a leg off." In the end, they took turns. After an hour of slicing, sweating, and swearing, they'd sawed through the clothes, skin, fat, muscle, sinews, and bone. Dale and Luke had hit the showers, and Trevor loaded up the body, after a trip to his truck to stash a little something for his dogs. As the inferno roared, the smoke had climbed up over the crematory, dark and angry, writhing like a woman possessed. Shaking off the memory, Trevor recast his line. His hands were shaking, which pissed him off. He didn't believe in jinxes, he told himself. Luke and Dale's deaths were just two bad accidents. Trevor blinked at the water next to the boat. Something too big to be a trout was coming to the surface. The woman's head emerged. Hunks of hair streamed like seaweed across her scarred face. Beneath hairless brows, her green eyes glared at Trevor. Dropping the pole, he yelled and scrambled backwards, slipping and banging his head on the stern seat. "I remember,"
what you did to me, Trevor.
Trevor stared, wide-eyed, heart hammering, watching her hand grab the rowboat's rim. He smelled the smoke first. Flames licked over the sides of the boat, crackling hungrily. She grinned as she watched Trevor's skin blister and melt like ice cream. His screams echoed off the canyon walls, accompanied by her cackling laughter. Brian Judson's boots scattered stones on the trail. Soon he'd be above the tree line, away from the news that kept coming, away from anything that could burn. He breathed deeply, trying to clear his head. "Our Father who art in heaven," he murmured, "hallowed be thy name." The familiar refrain did little to calm him. The loss of Luke was bad enough. The grizzled old guy had worked for Brian for 15 years, and while known to be a drunk, he'd always come to work sober. He'd probably been careless with a cigarette. And Dale couldn't have been the first dumb kid to wreck his car on a winding road at night. But Trevor's death defied reason. Brian had heard of peat bogs catching fire, but Lynx Lake was deep and wide, not exactly the Okefenokee swamp. They'd made a living with fire, and they died in fire. And when the bodies had been recovered, their left legs were nowhere to be found. A memory had nagged at Brian that morning. He'd checked the schedule. The last time Trevor, Dale, and Luke had been on day shift together was January 27th. That day, there was only one cremation on the books. Brian remembered then, answering Trevor's call. He'd been at the assessor's office paying the tax bill, trying to figure out how he was going to pay the rest of the crematory bills. "Handle it," he'd instructed Trevor testily. "Get it done." Brian sat down on a boulder, feeling tightness in his chest. He glanced up and saw the woman leaning against a cliff. Her naked skin was streaked with scars. Sunlight streamed between her body and the rock, through the gap where her left leg had been. Her burned, blistered lips twisted into a smile. Brian yelped and leaped to his feet, nerves jangling with panic. "Please, don't kill me," he begged. "I didn't do anything to you."
You were in charge, Brian. You told them to do it.
"I had to," he sputtered. "The cremation chamber, it's very old. It was too small."
They cut my leg off, Brian.
"I know," he babbled. "I should have sent you to one of the funeral homes in the city that had a bigger oven, but I needed the money to make payroll."
Where's my leg, Brian?
"I don't know," he said. "They should have burned it. Put it in with the rest of your ashes." He was trembling uncontrollably. He forced his eyes to look at her disfigured face. "I'm sorry, Adrienne," he stammered. "I remember you from school. You were a good person. You deserve better than what you got from us. I'm so sorry." Head cocked, she stared at him for a long moment. Peering out between hunks of ruined hair, her lashless green eyes narrowed. Brian looked at the ground, feeling her stare like the heat of a glaring light bulb in an interrogation room. How would it start, he wondered. Would she light his clothes on fire? Would they stick to his skin as it melted off? How long would it take? Would anyone hear him scream? His stomach lurched, and he felt warmth running down his leg. He squeezed his eyes shut in shame and terror. It was quiet. Brian opened one eye. Adrienne was gone. He found himself collapsing to the ground, pebbles digging into his palms. He felt hysterical laughter bubbling up. He hardly dared believe it. She had let him live. Slowly, his trembling ebbed, but something didn't feel right. Brian raised himself onto an elbow and looked back, down the length of his body. The left leg of his pants, empty, lay flat against the ground.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Other Stories. The Cutoff was written by Jen Merish, narrated by Justin Fife, produced by Darren Holbrook, with music by Ghost Hack and Tom Robson, and sound effects provided by freesound.org and zapsplat.com. The episode illustration was provided by Luke Spoon of Carrion House. A quick thanks to our community managers, Jasmine Arch, Joshua Boucher, and his eyeless ones, Pastrano and Cody Czarzasty, and to Joshua Boucher for helping with our submission reading. And of course to Ben Errington for the ongoing explosion of content he fires out of his social media cannon. Jen Merish's dream job is to write Twilight Zone episodes, but until then she's a website administrator by day and the writer of odd stories by night. Jen's work can be found in The Arcanist, No Sleep Podcast, Scare Street, and numerous anthologies. Jen can be found haunting her local library near Chicago, USA. Justin Fife is an audiobook narrator and voice actor, and he can be found on Threads at justin.fife. The Other Stories is a production of the Story Studio Hawk and Cleaver, and is brought to you with a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. That means don't change it, don't sell it, but by all means share the hell out of it. Until next time.